Imagine that I jumped into a time machine, set it back to 2018, and used the opportunity to tell you that a comedian would permit Vladimir Putin to hold a parade in Moscow come 2026. At first, you would probably think that it was a joke. After all, I said a comedian was giving the authorization. Then, in 2020, you would probably get pretty angry that I did not use my time machine to stop a crazy pandemic. Then in 2022, you would get even angrier that I did not use my time machine to stop the invasion itself. But finally, come 2026, you would understand what I meant. Russia held its annual Victory Day parade today. And because Zelensky was so generous to permit it, I thought we could spend a few minutes just watching the wonderful sights from the event. So, interspersed with fun parade B-roll, which for some reason still seems to be shot in 720p, let's examine how we got to this makeshift ceasefire, why it was credible, and how Ukraine already exploited the security vulnerability of the parade despite the 11th hour ceasefire agreement. To begin, we should review what happened. For about a month now, Russia has been worried about the safety of its propaganda campaign / annual celebration of the Soviet Union's defeat of Nazi Germany in the Great Patriotic War. That is what happens when your air defenses have not stopped Ukrainian drones for months now. More on them in a bit. Facing this quandary, Russia declared a unilateral ceasefire for May 9th. Ukraine noted that you cannot just declare a ceasefire whenever it is convenient for you, particularly when you are no longer dictating the tempo of the war in Moscow. Yes, that is a bizarre sentence that I just uttered, but I meant every word of it. Zelensky therefore announced that a ceasefire could begin on May 6th, and it would be up to Russia to uphold the terms through May 9th if it wanted to have its parade in peace. Russia promptly kept on firing right as Ukraine's version of the ceasefire started, and so everyone's eyes shifted to Red Square, waiting to see what might be blown up a few days later. As the week progressed, apparently the Kremlin started to worry that something might actually happen. Thus, the question became how to escape the situation. Now, how would you solve the problem? What you need is someone who can mediate the situation and has the hardware to demonstrate a commitment to peace. And thus we got a Trump-brokered ceasefire, with very different terms depending on whom you ask. On Truth Social, Trump declared that it will last 3 days, through May 11th, and cover all kinetic activity. Zelensky instead posted a ceasefire limited to just the parade. And if anyone was unsure, he helpfully included the GPS coordinates for Red Square to ensure that no one would hit that area. Again, here are the coordinates that no one is supposed to hit, and he really means it. And even if he does authentically mean it, anyone wishing to maliciously comply with the request knew exactly what to hit just outside of the forbidden zone. Also note the trolling. Zelensky resolves to allow Russia to hold its parade, which I thank him for, lest I not get the B-roll I need for the rest of the year. Well, it turns out that the parade did indeed occur without incident, and the ceasefire seemed to hold outside of Red Square overnight and into the morning beforehand. Anyway, reading between the lines here, I doubt that Ukraine believes that Russia will commit to the ceasefire beyond its myopic interest in holding a parade. Hence why Ukraine only committed to the time and location of the parade. Trump, meanwhile, wants to oversell his contribution to world peace, hence the ceasefire, according to him, is scheduled to last 3 days. We will see how that plays out. The tangible benefit that Ukraine is receiving for a few hours of calm is the swap of 1,000 prisoners of war. That is something that should not be overshadowed by the silliness of the rest of the situation, as those are real people with real families. Meanwhile, the whole thing is credible, at least for the duration of the parade, because the United States can condition its remaining support to Ukraine based on Kyiv's compliance. As far as we know, the United States still supplies intelligence information about the location of Russian air defense systems. More on them in a minute. In addition, Ukraine also receives American weaponry via purchases from NATO partners. Now, the Iran war has likely affected the value of each of those contributions. We know that the White House has publicly warned that European purchases are likely to be delayed, as the United States prioritizes restocking its own warehouses after exhausting so many resources during the war. A war, by the way, which still allegedly has not restarted, despite multiple days of the United States and Iran exchanging fire. It is also probably true that Russian intelligence analysts have diverted to the Iran desk, leaving less direct information for Ukraine regarding Russian movements. Either way, Ukraine would want to protect the long-term safety of those lifelines, so flagrantly violating the terms of the Victory Day ceasefire would not have been advisable. On the other end of the spectrum, the credible commitment story for Russia is more straightforward. As I say that, I realize how rare it is for me to claim that Russia's commitment is credible, but here we are. Had Moscow violated the terms of the agreement, then Ukraine would not have felt any obligation to continue allowing the parade to proceed in safety. I suppose that this is a positive sign regarding the trajectory of an actual resolution to the war compared to the alternative, but I am not about to start making retirement plans. However, there was something missing from the conversation, and I mean missing, because the ceasefire news did not even make it to the main US evening news segments. I guess that just shows you the level of ceasefire fatigue in the West right now. Anyway, what was missing from the conversation is the fact that the damage was already done. The ceasefire agreement was only reached at the 11th hour, well past the point that Russia had already needed to plan for a parade sans ceasefire. On the propaganda side of things, the Kremlin reduced the scope of this year's parade and withheld ground-based military hardware, partially because of the security concerns, and partially because the country lacks the spare equipment. In the absence of actual hardware, they instead played B-roll of hardware used presumably near the front lines. And now that I am showing you B-roll that they aired during the parade, I am forced to confront the philosophical question of whether my use of it technically makes it C-roll. Less philosophically, I guess they did not even want to have the World War II-era T-34 tank make its annual appearance, lest it draw extra attention to the absence of modern hardware. Even Putin's speech lacked the anticipated rallying cry regarding the special military operation. There was a passing reference to how Russian soldiers are confronting an aggressive force armed and supported by the entire NATO bloc. An interesting claim given that the Prime Minister of Slovakia was in attendance. But despite the support of the entire NATO bloc, maybe or maybe not including Slovakia, our heroes are advancing. Of course, that last part is not quite true either. Frontline trackers either show the situation on the ground as static, or that Ukraine has made some gains over the last couple of months. Aside from that, the foreign dignitaries attending were not a who's who of the Western counter-coalition, plus Slovakia, but more like a who is bored on a May weekend. On the practical side of things, Russia had to start moving its air defense systems to Moscow days ago. Accordingly, Ukraine had already taken advantage of the open season elsewhere. May 7th and May 8th appeared to be the main target date, which featured perhaps the second largest drone attack that Ukraine has committed since the war began. Seemingly everything in the western half of Russia was a target, including Moscow itself, oil refineries in Yaroslavl, an air traffic control center and research facility in Rostov, something in Perm, and perhaps an FSB building in Chechnya. That is on top of a series of other attacks earlier in the week, including flamingos migrating to a factory producing navigation equipment in the Chuvash Republic. Presumably, Ukraine's strike rate will go down in the next couple of days, one because Ukraine was likely front-loading its inventories to take advantage of the situation, and two because Russian air defenses will return to a more strategically sound posture. However, Russian air defenses overall continue to be a key target for Ukraine, and if the Kremlin cannot reverse the trend, the long-term trajectory of the air war would predict even greater economic losses for Russia. So, what are our takeaway lines for today? This truly was the silliest of ceasefires. The US position allowed the minimal terms of the ceasefire to be credible, and by the time that the ceasefire began, Ukraine had already accrued most of the benefits that there were to be had. Meanwhile, you can get even more benefits from reading one of these 2 books on the origins of the war. Check the video description for more information about them. And if you enjoyed today's video, then please like, share, and subscribe, and I will see you next time. Take care.